All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Betty Cruz, and I'm part of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh team. It feels so great to be here with you for our third annual summit and our 52nd annual World Affairs Institute for Student Leaders. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Both the summit and institute focus on a different global theme each year and bring together distinct audiences. This year, we're hosting the summit and institute on the same day, kicking off together side by side, because we know that the answers to our most pressing global issues lies with every single one of you who are in this room. We're thankful to be hosting today's events in this beautiful space at the University of Pittsburgh, William Pitt Student Union, and alongside some amazing partners. We're honored to be co-hosting this year's summit on deconstructing the American dream with Vibrant Pittsburgh, and we're thankful to have with us today Sabrina Saunders Mosby, President and CEO of Vibrant Pittsburgh. And we're also so appreciative of Rotary International, who has been our partner every year for the last 52 years of the World Affairs Institute for Student Leaders. Representing Rotary is Abdi Ramsel of Homer Center High School, who serves as a district governor for approximately 60 Interact clubs across the region. Now I'd like to turn it over to each of them who will share some opening remarks. Sabrina.
Thank you, Betty, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. All right, as Betty mentioned, I'm Sabrina Saunders Mosby, and I serve as president and CEO of Vibrant Pittsburgh. Vibrant Pittsburgh is an economic development membership organization working to support and partner with our region's business community to help to make Pittsburgh a destination of choice for people of all backgrounds. I was reminded this morning while reconnecting that I started my career working in a congressional office, supporting immigration and helping to mitigate some of the red tape associated with our policies. It is not lost on me the importance of continuing that work and also continuing to educate and to build leaders who will support the policies and procedures and equity that will be required to make this region and this country, this world, a place where we all feel welcome, appreciated, and valued. I'm so proud and pleased to help partner with the World Affairs Council on this important day, and excited to listen and to learn and be present in this moment of forward motion. I'm even more pleased to be standing here with Abby, an amazing student leader who represents what I know is in this room and the viewership today. Thanks again.
Thank you, Sabrina and Betty. So good morning, everyone. My name's Abdi Ramsel. I am a current senior at Homer Center High School, and I am also the current Interact District Governor of District 7305. So Rotary has been in partnership with the council for a long, remarkable 52 years. And this partnership helped today to make this important event happen. And during my year as district governor, I hope to establish some new Interact clubs, because there's not one within 40 minutes of me. I'm sure half of you don't know where Homer Center is, and it's about an hour from here. And I would like to establish some more clubs and also attend at least one meeting of every Interact club in the district. So that's a lot of meetings, as they mentioned, over 60 clubs, and hope them in whichever way I can. So that's what I hope to accomplish with my year, as well as a few events. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abby and Sabrina, for your partnership and all that you do for our community, really. We'd also like to thank our friends at the Heinz Endowments for providing funding for this year's World Affairs Institute, which allowed us to increase the number of scholarships that were available for youth this year. Now, before we get started, let's ground ourselves right here where we are in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the land beneath our feet, the unceded ancestral lands of many indigenous peoples, including the Seneca, Lenape, Osage, and Shawnee. Through this acknowledgement, we invite you to join us in paying respect to the elders, both past and present. Now, by a show of hands, how many of you believe that your roots, wherever your family originally called home, whether that's another city in the US, another neighborhood, another country, how many of you feel that these roots play a part in who you are today? Yeah, beautiful. It's with this awareness and appreciation of these very roots in each of us that we invite you all to engage in an open-hearted exploration as we move through the day. You'll see some stories and images around the room that are from our friends at Reimagining Migration. Please check them out, take a moment, take it in. You'll hear from our speakers who bring diverse lived experiences from Liberia to DC to Swissvale. You'll connect with our program partners and with each other. This final point is most important because no matter what's learned here, it is nothing if it stays here. So what are you going to do next, right? We invite you to ask this question throughout the day. What will you do next now that you know? Whether that knowing came from something you learned from one of the speakers, a story that was shared from a new friend, an illuminating fact you heard, what will you do next? We'll be coming back to that later, so please keep that grounding in mind. Now, we're thrilled to kick off the day with a few stories because we can all hear facts, but nothing feels as important and powerful as a true personal story. So please join us in welcoming Abdi Lugundi, Ivonne Smith-Tapia, and Joseph Sackor. They're each of our storytellers today, and we're going to start up first with Abdi. Abdi, please come up.
Okay, we're on. Everybody can hear me better? For sure. Where was I at? The Kakuma refugee camps. They're right on the border of Kenya. And I wasn't born as a Kenyan citizen. I was born as a Somali Bantu refugee. My parents escaped from persecution from Somalia, will lead them to the camps. And what was supposed to be temporary became a permanent stay for them. And, my birth was a pure example of that. And to describe Kakuma in Swahili literally means nowhere. And that was just to describe the conditions of the camp. Kind of moving forward, I was happy though. It was home for me. I was free. I could do kind of whatever I wanted in, my little area. I didn't have to worry about school. I could run around all day. It, was really, really important for me. Once I found out that I was going to America, things were really starting to change. I knew that wherever I was going, it was better than the current situation I was in. It was a strange feeling I really couldn't explain. Kind of moving forward, I started to feel lucky because I know not everyone got the chance to kind of feel this. Not everyone got accepted to kind of come into the United States. So I was very, very lucky, very, very fortunate. Experiencing being in a moving vehicle, going in an airplane was really, really terrifying, especially if you're doing it for the very first time, especially if you've never been outside of your home for the first time. Going into the airplane, taking escalators, this was a whole different experience for me. Coming into Pittsburgh, I came around 2004 with my family, and the feeling of coming to America was extraordinary. The bright lights, the big buildings, it was like coming into a whole new world. But when school started, I noticed that I was different. I was made to be different. During that time, the way I looked at people was if they was American or not. And I noticed that being American, it wasn't just being white. It was a feeling of, being comfortable. You had the right to exist, to chase your dreams and kind of be whoever you want, a right to focus on your education and pursue all your goals. I wanted that. And I was going to do whatever it took to take that, to, earn that. Up until high school, I was slowly stripping away my culture, my identity, my language to kind of achieve this goal. And, I soon came to realize that if, I did all this, I could be able to focus on school. I could also, create a pathway for success for myself. Come to think about it, one person said to me, "Your English is too good to be an African." And that changed everything. I'm like, hold up, what? the American dream was halted. I was looking at things differently. I was like, I could never be American. I can't be American because of my name. And when people see it on a piece of paper at their reaction, that's also one thing. I can't be American because of, where I come from. It's visible. I can't be American because of my skin color. And throughout American history, it's always been made to become a second-class citizen until, once again, a piece of paper legitimized it as being American. I couldn't be American even though I was American under citizenship. Damn. This changed literally everything. But I soon came to the realization that even though I was chasing this dream of being American, I wasn't doing it for America. I wasn't doing it for other people. I knew that English was very important to success. I knew that English was a way that I was able to navigate spaces and be able to encounter and communicate, in this new world that I was growing up in. I knew English was very, very important to me. I knew English was a language that my parents didn't get a chance to learn. I knew English was a right of education that my parents didn't get a chance to receive. So that's what made things different. I also came to the realization that, my story was also important. It granted me the right to get a bachelor's degree at Allegheny College. It set me apart from all the other college applicants. And my parents' journey, I think that was the most important thing, because their determination for me to have a future here in America, risking their lives, that was way, way, way beyond the bar set by the American dream. That is America's dream. And when I tell people all the time, don't let the American dream define your success. You have to find it within yourself. Because when the American dream was being made, they wasn't thinking about you. They wasn't thinking about me. So you gotta find your own way, build your own system, work around the system, understand the system, and live America's dream. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. I am extremely nervous and I'm going to blame COVID because for the last 2 years I haven't speak publicly, so I'm going to read so I don't forget what I want to say. My name is Ivonne Smith-Tapia. I grew up in Colombia in a middle-class family. My dad and mom worked very hard to give us a life better than the ones that they had. Like many people from his generation, my dad grew up believing that life in the United States was the better life that anybody could get. This was especially true for people with a strong work ethic. For my dad, the American dream meant that a person without college education will be able to succeed. When my sister and I were teenagers, my parents took us to the United States for vacation. And we saw the American dream for the first time. And we saw that it had many faults. We saw people living on the streets, we saw poverty, and we saw discrimination and racism. And that experience was a very eye-opening experience for me. And that really make my feelings for my country stronger. I feel more connected and more in love of Colombia. And I thought that that was my place to be, my home country. I graduated from high school, went to college. I finished a master's degree program, and I started working right away with international nonprofits, with the Colombian government, and with think tanks. I knew I could be happy in Colombia. I knew that I will achieve my personal and professional dreams there, because life is ironic. In 2010, during a trip to the United States, I fell in love with an American. And 2 years later, I decided to move to the United States. My husband and I thought it would be easier for me to start a new life in Colombia than for him to go back to Colombia and start from scratch. We were hopeful. I thought that with my 10 years of work experience and ability to speak English and transferable skills, it would be easier for me to start a new life in the United States. I was mistaken. It was very hard for me to find a job. It was very hard for me to understand why people and organizations look at my resume and see that something that it was wrong. It was too international. I also struggled personally, not only professionally. I felt that I didn't belong. It was hard for me to fit in. I wasn't a refugee. I wasn't an international student. I didn't come here from work. I was really lonely and lost, literally and figuratively. I don't know if you have taken the bus in Pittsburgh. It was very hard to understand. I knew I need to make sacrifices and find my way on my own. I took a job as a receptionist. I got a student loan to make my resume less international and more local. I graduated with a second master's degree and I was able to find jobs. All of this journey took me 10 years. And I thought before moving to the United States, it would take me around 2. During this time, my husband and I bought a house. I became a United States citizen and we had a baby. I'm living my dad's American dream. For me, it's a little bit more complicated. The American dream shouldn't require people to sacrifice their identity and their culture and lose their accents to fit in. The American dream shouldn't require people to work and sacrifice life, family life and well-being. For me, the American dream shouldn't be focused on capitalism ideas of just buying and accumulate. The American dream should be a life of acceptance, belonging, and respect, where immigrants can be themselves and have the support they need to find their own pathways in the United States. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Great. My name is Joseph Sackor. I am originally from Liberia, West Africa. For some of you that don't know, Liberia has, you may Google it, has some historical ties with the United States. This is where the free slaves were repatriated more than 200 years ago. Well, I was 2 years away from graduating from college when a war broke out in my country. While in my little town, the rebels attacked my town, and I went and hid myself in the roof. I had my aunt with me, who was 80 years old. My little nephews and nieces were in the other building. While hiding myself, the rebels came, took five of my nephews and nieces, went and dumped them in the well. So a day later, I had to make a conscious decision whether to flee the scene and leave my 80-year-old aunt so that she can die right there or in the hands of the rebel. But I decided not to do so. I got down from the roof, on top of the roof, then came down and collected my aunt, put her on my back. We started walking, got in the forest. After 2 days, I was tired. So she looked at me and said, I want you to leave me here. If the wild animals will eat me, I have lived longer enough. You are very young, but you will go and narrate the story to the rest of the family. I looked at her and said, hell no. I will never leave you in this situation. If you are to die, if we are to die, we'll die together. So I stayed with her. 2 days later, because she was helpless, she took her last breath. And because I could not bury her, I just took some leaves and cover her, pray over her, and move on. That is something that kept, every time I think about it, even in the office, it makes my day very, very bad. Later, then I rejoined with the rest of the family and I explained the harrowing situation to them, how the rest of the family were ruthlessly killed. We did not waste any time in Monrovia. We sought refuge in Guinea. Fast forward. While in Guinea, where more than 300,000 refugees sought refuge, I saw literally children. Guinea is a Francophone country. They do not speak English, and Liberia is an English-speaking country. So I saw children going around begging for money and had nowhere to go. There was no school. So I thought about it, so well, we cannot have this kind of situation. I started working with some of my colleagues, former college students. So, well, let's go and have a little building where we will volunteer to teach these children, because these are the future leaders of our country when we shall return. We work together. We work with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and finally, we got a building. So we work with International Rescue Committee and open more than 1,500 schools from kindergarten all the way to high school. Many of these students that went to that school, some of them are medical doctors here in the United States and elsewhere. So instead of us sitting down and thinking about all the hard things that we went through, we didn't do that. So that's what we did in the refugee camp. But it was really daunting because we had to depend on handout. One good thing, I must always be grateful to the people of the United States, because every food that came to that refugee camp, it was written on those bags, this is donated from the people of the United States, from your tax dollars. So we are very grateful. Without that, we would have literally died at those refugee camps. Now, coming to the United States, I came with only 2 tents and 3 shirts. And someone fell for me and quarters. 1 quarter came in my pocket. Arrived in Houston. At Houston Airport, we were welcomed by Lutheran Church services and other hosts of people. They saw us. Someone came to me and asked me, say, are you, the next day, are you married? So, but because of the accent, I thought this person was asking whether I am married, but instead of married. So in my accent is married to say, well, you have a partner. But I was like, well, no, I'm not married. I'm Joseph. I'm not married. So he said, no. I'm talking whether you have a van. I said, oh, okay. You mean that whether I have a? No, I don't. I just give him a single. So in Houston, one cultural shock getting there was that the football. A friend of mine took me to a football game. It is only in the United States here that we call football, handball. So I got there, as I was so happy. We went there, and while in the waiting, I saw all these huge guys with a helmet. I said, well, are these people that coming to entertain people? He said, no, these are the football players. I said, hell no, I've never seen a football player with a helmet in Liberia or any part of the world. He said, yeah, this is American football. I said, okay, well, this is one of my biggest cultural shock because I've never seen it in the refugee camp. Okay, so I started my American dream by taking a GED because all my documents left in the war. I passed my GED and later enrolled in the college, and I got my 2 bachelors and 2 masters subsequently. Later on, then I just saw the need, at least, to be actively involved, civically engaged. That happened in 2008. When Obama, ran for office, I said to myself, wait a minute. If this man with African, origin, whose parents came from, one of the parents came from Africa, who go for the highest office, then I think I have a shot too. Okay, so I went and naturalized. I became a U.S. citizen and began, to canvass and all of these stuff. And luckily, I got, accepted to at least do phone banking. And most of the people that will call, where did you come from with your accent? I said, from Liberia. So, oh my God, that's very nice. I said, yes, I want to be, I love the politics. So I got engaged with the Refugee Congress, where I became the honorary delegate for, delegate for Pennsylvania and a little honorary delegate. So my thing here now is that educating other refugees who left their countries because they're not civically engaged, because many of those people actually left because of oppression, because they were involved in political process. That's what got them out of the country. So this is why they left. And this is what I'm doing. And I am very, very happy to be part of this engagement. And I want to thank you all for having me here. Thank you.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Joe, Abdi, Yvonne. Thank you for your courage in each of your journeys and for your generosity in sharing your stories with us here today. Thank you. Let's give them another round of applause, please. Incredible. Continuing with this theme, please welcome Pittsburgh Taiko, who will share a bit on their story and share a special performance.
Not have done that. It's on. Hello. So while we're doing a little bit of set changing, we are Pittsburgh Taiko. Taiko, as you may or may not know, originally comes from Japan. It's a Japanese traditional art, modified a little bit for stage performance, which also happened in Japan in the 50s. But I wanted to give you a little bit of cultural context about how we came to be Pittsburgh Taiko and how that has to do with the immigrant experience. So Japan, a lot of Japanese came as immigrants to the US in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. And of course, they brought Taiko with them and they brought other cultural traditions. And that was good. And eventually World War II happened. And in World War II, the US went to war with Japan. And Japanese Americans were declared to be enemy aliens and forcibly removed from their homes and incarcerated for the duration of the war, at least the people on the West Coast. So this was a huge disruption. I'm sure you can imagine having to pack up your house into 2 bags and losing everything. So when people came back after the war, they wanted to blend in. They wanted to be more American. So they didn't teach their children. A lot of families decided not to teach their children the Japanese cultural arts and Japanese traditions. Fast forward to the late 60s, when we have civil rights groups going on, anti-war marches. The children of the parents who experienced incarceration are now trying to find their own identities, to forge an Asian American identity, to reconnect with their cultural roots, their cultural heritage. So they ended up finding Taiko, the Japanese American in the West Coast in California, and they formed the first North American Taiko groups. So with help from a lot of people in the Taiko community, Taiko became a worldwide art, and here we are today. The next piece we're going to do for you is called Uneri, and it was written by the most famous Taiko group, probably Kodo, in Japan, and released to the entire worldwide Taiko community to learn and practice and perform for free. So this next piece is Uneri by Kodo. Hold on.
Incredible. I feel that through my soul. Thank you so much to Pittsburgh Taiko for this performance and for most importantly for helping to keep this part of Japanese history and culture alive in Pittsburgh. Another round of applause, please, for Pittsburgh Taiko. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Rachel Perić. Rachel is the Executive Director of Welcoming America. Inspired by her family's refugee story and by the worldwide movement of welcoming, Rachel works to create communities where all residents, including immigrants and refugees, can thrive and belong. Rachel.
Thank you so much, Betty, for the invitation to be here and for your leadership, and also to the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. This is actually my second invitation to come to Pittsburgh from Betty. The first was back in 2019 when my organization Welcoming America brought about 400 leaders from around the country to come and see the work happening right here in Pittsburgh to build a more welcoming community for everyone, including people who've come to the city from other parts of the world as immigrants and as refugees. we were just blown away, I think, by the work that's been happening here over many years to really create that environment of belonging and to back it up with policies and practices that affirm everyone's ability to participate civically, socially, economically in this community. And in 2021, Pittsburgh became the 12th city in the United States to become certified as welcoming, which means that your values are getting matched by those policies and practices. And I want to recognize and give a shout out to Faye Alabi, who I think is here in the mayor's office, and all the many leaders of Welcoming Pittsburgh who have done the hard work to build that and to keep building it, because we know that the work of creating a welcoming community is never done. And today I want to invite you all to be part of that work here in Pittsburgh, part of the movement of welcoming communities globally, and also push yourself, challenge yourself. Because I believe that this work of creating communities that work for everyone, where everyone is welcome, has never been more important to affirming the promise of a new kind of American dream, an America in which we can all belong and which belongs to all of us. I was really inspired hearing the stories from those who were kind enough to share theirs, and I want to share a little bit about my own family story. My mother and my grandparents came to the United States in the late 1940s. My grandparents were both Holocaust survivors who had lost just about everyone that they loved in this world to where hate and intolerance can take a society. They arrived in New York as refugees. And my grandmother said that when she saw the Statue of Liberty for the first time, she realized that she was finally free, free to be herself, free to hold her identity and this American identity, free from persecution, free to belong. My grandmother also went on to open a small business, which became the backbone of my family, but also part of the backbone of the economy, first in the city of New York, where immigrants today contribute about $210 billion a year in economic activity. And then later, she reopened her business in a small town in Maryland and was one of the few businesses keeping a dying Main Street alive during the 1980s. And these stories aren't unique stories. They're really the stories of American communities and so many others that are being reshaped by people who come and bring their talent, their ideas, their innovation and diverse perspectives. It's also the story of cities like Pittsburgh. And just to put the dollars and cents behind this idea, immigrants pay about $1.2 billion in taxes here in Pittsburgh and hold about $2.7 billion in spending power. So despite so often being scapegoated as people taking from, immigrants are contributing and adding to. Our previous thinking was that people came to these places because they were already successful, attractive hubs of economic activity, cultural activity, which is true. But what we're also learning is that places can intentionally design themselves to be open and welcoming and actually shape their destinies. Places don't just become great and then people move there. They become great when they intentionally make sure that people are able to put down roots. They become great when they intentionally build the kind of trust that allows people who are strangers to become neighbors. And when they intentionally remove the barriers to participation so that our race, our language, our origin, our religion, our ability, our gender identity, our zip code don't become predictors of our ability to thrive and to belong. And in so many ways, this story and the stories that you've heard today aren't singular triumphs, but really our collective story as Americans. That you can come from anywhere in the world, be of any race, creed, or culture, and call yourself American is one of our most sacred values. It's what makes us American. It's also what drives our economy, our innovation, and in many ways, our moral standing in the world. Some say that the American dream is about the pursuit of individual wealth, but I believe it's about the dream that's held in the highest promise, not reality, but promise of our founding documents, that we are all created equal. Of course, we hold a lot of contradiction around this value and identity. So when my grandmother arrived, it was true that she belonged in the small enclave of Brooklyn, New York, but it was impossible for her and many other Jewish Americans, Black Americans, immigrant Americans to buy a home in many parts of the country. She arrived at a time when enslavement was still a living memory, at a time of Jim Crow, when Black Americans were locked out of voting, jobs, basic safety, and millions were migrating north in search of better opportunity and still finding rampant discrimination. It was a time when, as we've just heard, just a few years before, the US had interned Japanese Americans and had deported Mexican Americans, many of them US citizens. Native Americans, indigenous people were still seeing their land and culture stolen from them. And it was a time when millions of Americans, white, Black, immigrant, indigenous, had only recently experienced the deep poverty of the Great Depression. The stories may be in the past, but their legacy is still with us today, a legacy of inequality, often based on racial hierarchy and on economic class, that holds us back from fulfilling the promise and opportunity of shared prosperity. And just to quantify that, if we were to close the racial wealth gap in this country, we would see a 14% increase in our GDP, about $2.1 trillion annually. And just to put that in human terms, it doesn't have to be the case that Black residents of the city are 6 times more likely to go to bed hungry than white residents. And it doesn't have to be the case that about half of immigrants in this country went without benefits to which they were entitled for food during COVID because they were more afraid of the fear of being deported than not getting food on the table. American children aren't eating not because we don't have enough food to go around, but because we haven't decided definitively, once and for all, that they are us, our children, that they sit within as what the scholar John Powell calls the circle of human concern. We have 2 competing visions for this country. One is an exclusive vision of American identity that defines belonging based on a largely shifting definition of whiteness. Some are us, others are them. So there's this exclusive vision of American identity, and then there's this inclusive vision of American identity, a welcoming definition. Like in that moment when my grandmother believed that she could belong. An American identity to which we can all belong, white, Black, indigenous, newly arrived, here for generations. Betty asked me to talk today about the state of immigration policy, and I promise that I will get to that, but we can't talk about that policy without situating our debate on immigrants in these 2 competing visions, because we tend to think about immigration policy as being about who crosses a border, who gets to come. But what drives that policy is ultimately about who we decide to call us. Who is the American in this American dream? Immigration policy is also not just about whose visa gets processed, who gets an asylum hearing. It's also about how we relate to the 1 in 4 American children who are immigrants or the children of, including probably many of you in this room and my own children. When our young people walk into classrooms, our community centers, into City Hall, whose dreams do they see? Do theirs belong there? Do ours belong there? Can our American dream be big enough for all of us? We can either belong to a healthy, affirming vision of the American dream that welcomes each of us, that is powerful because each of us has power and agency in it and a future in it. Or I believe our next generation is at risk of an unhealthy form of belonging, the same unhealthy form of belonging that drove many of us to this country. Some of you may have heard about something called Great Replacement theory. It's basically a racist conspiracy theory, a dangerous disinformation campaign that traffics in the idea that a more racially and ethnically diverse America is a threat, and immigration is a ploy to replace white people living in Western countries. It animated the gunman in Buffalo and also here in Pittsburgh at Tree of Life. But besides its contributions to violent extremism, Great Replacement is also behind a lot of the narrative that surrounds our immigration debate. And because we are so much like fish in water, it can be hard to see that. So I want to break it down a little bit for you. The first argument that this theory makes is that we have a shared national identity that's threatened by racial diversity. Now, the idea that we share something in common as a country is really a powerful one, but what we share in common can never be about whiteness. It can never be about our biological features. It needs to be about the things that we do in common together. And a lot of times that gets built through things like military service, but we can also build it right here in our own communities, where we go from us and them to this shared sense of we on our soccer pitches, in our school cafeterias, in our institutions of higher learning. That's work that all of you can be a part of and is critically important in our very segregated communities and in communities that are shifting demographically. And I know my good friend Justin Gest will talk more about that as well. Replacement also implies the loss of power and status through invasion, being overwhelmed, a scarcity narrative. And we hear this a lot in the immigration debate as we talk about the border. But the narrative doesn't need to focus just on the border. It can also focus on our communities. And if it did, we would see that far from overwhelmed, many places are clamoring for more people, given our aging population and in many cases, declining population. Far from seeing immigration as a threat, the hundreds of welcoming communities around the globe are seeing it as an opportunity to be a more welcoming place, not only for those arriving, but for those who have been here for generations. In Boise, Idaho, that's meant looking at how bus routes get people to work and making sure that more newly arriving refugees, but also longtime residents have been able to get to their jobs. In Dayton, Ohio, the community expanded its support for entrepreneurs, saw a boom on Main Street, and also was able to turn around more than 50 years of population decline thanks to its welcoming efforts. In Portland, Maine, a new generation of civic leaders is emerging who've helped the city have a more resilient COVID response and be better prepared for whatever emergency comes next. When it comes to immigration policy, it's cities and towns who are leading the way in dispelling the myth of replacement and replacing it with the vision of a society in which each of us can belong and contribute at our fullest. It's important to understand when it comes to our immigration policy, our federal government determines who can enter and how legal status is conferred. But access to benefits and the narratives that shape our understanding of who deserves those benefits get shaped in our communities, and each of you have the power to shape that. So where are we now when it comes to immigration policy and federal immigration policy? As I said, a lot of our policies are actually about people who are already here. And in fact, today there are millions of people here who are on a very tenuous form of status, who are at risk of being deported at any moment, and who have no way to get right in their legal status unless our Congress passes comprehensive immigration reform. For those Americans known as Dreamers who are covered through a status called DACA, there's an ongoing court case that threatens this program, and a legal solution is also badly needed. Unfortunately, because great replacement is bad for America, but also great for motivating fear and voter turnout, there's not a lot of appetite to solve this, which is why it's so crucial that we get behind these fear narratives and also mobilize politically. Like all issues in the US, it's going to take people who are currently on the sidelines to stand up alongside those who've been bravely standing up for themselves, but who don't have the ability to elect leaders or choose the policies that affect so much of their lives. When it comes to refugee policy, we are also in a rebuilding period, and I'm sure that the folks in this community who are leading refugee resettlement could use your support as they rebuild to help support those who are arriving with refugee or asylee status. There's so much more I want to say on immigration policy, but I know that I only have a couple minutes. So I'll just, I think, maybe focus on one dimension of immigration policy, which is the idea of keeping families together. And right now, with so many families in our country who are at risk of being deported, and so many more members of families who are trying to reunite with family members here in the United States, centering this value of families being together is a guiding principle that I think we can bring to our immigration system, and I hope we will. I'll also say that the solution to less illegal immigration is more legal immigration, and we have deliberately cut off the pathways for that because it helps further a narrative of chaos. But the actual narrative of immigration in this country could not be farther from that truth. We are living through an era of migration where it's likely that more people will be displaced by climate, by conflict, and by the opportunity to do better for themselves and their families. And places like Pittsburgh can really light the way in showing that far from the chaos that we're presented with, we have the capacity to build our capacity to be abundant, welcoming places where everyone can thrive, both new and longtime alike. As ambassadors for global engagement, for diplomacy, for cooperation, no one understands this idea of being interconnected with the world better than those of you in this room. And your leadership to build bridges across walls, to reconcile our history and repair our present, to ask who is left out. Your work to build a welcoming infrastructure that enables each of us to thrive, to see ourselves as belonging, to find our common humanity is the measure of difference. Cities like Pittsburgh can be the positive role models our country needs for the thriving multiracial democracy that we can become. I'm very lucky to stand on this stage today. I'm lucky because I'm here because there were people that stood up for my family and our ability to belong and to find safety. And what that takes is moral courage. The moral courage to call out the lies of great replacement and to call in our neighbors to build communities where all of us are valued and can see ourselves as bound up in each other's future. I hope each of you will take up that call, and together we can live up to the promise of the American dream that can be an America in which each of us can belong and which belongs to each of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Rachel. You are going to hear more from Rachel in just a moment. We're going to set up for our panel and invite our panelists to start to make their way up. The session will be co-moderated by myself and Abdi, and we will have Joe and Justin and Rachel joining us. You also received note cards as you were coming in. Those are for you to go ahead and start jotting down any questions. Maybe you already have questions for Rachel. And for our other panelists as we move through the conversation. There will be two folks walking around the room, Sam and Nandana, and they are waving now. They're in the back of the room. And when you have a question written out, just raise your hand and they will come and grab the note card. Please go ahead and take a seat, panelists, and we'll get started. All right, as we're handing mics, I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. We've shared all of our speakers' bios ahead of time, so please make sure to check those out. We want to jump right into the conversation here. And Abdi and I will be asking our esteemed speakers a few questions. And again, we'll be turning it over to you as well and making sure we get some questions from the audience. As you know, we have two themes for today. Our summit attendees going deeper on deconstructing the American dream. Meanwhile, our high school students who are here for our youth designed World Affairs Institute for Student Leaders are exploring deconstructing culture. We're looking at these through the lens of immigrants and refugees with the hope of understanding what it takes to build belonging, exactly what Rachel was speaking to earlier. Now, Justin, let's start with you. Your new book, Majority Minority, is centered on how societies respond to demographic change. At the heart of this book, there are lessons rooted in history, as the US is expected to fully step into this shift of minority becoming majority by 2044. Tease out for us some of these major findings to ground our audience in the premise of the book and why it's relevant to today's conversation.
Great. Can you guys hear me in the back? Okay, that's good, because you may not be able to see me because I'm not that tall. So first off, it's really wonderful to be with you all today. I'm the son of a refugee, and when I hear the stories of refugees today, I see in them my own family, and so it's really heartwarming to listen to all this. First, let's start a little bit about what majority minority means. It's a milestone, a demographic milestone. It's not an event. It's not a great transition. There will not be fireworks or institutional change. It's just a milestone, a statistical milestone when the majority, the original or native, ethnic or racial or religious majority of a country no longer makes up 50% of that country's population. The other way to think of it is when a mix of other minorities together become a majority group, but it is basically a demographic milestone. But it is a milestone that is on the horizon in the United States because of the way that we think of the idea of race. It's the way we classify people as white or not white, and the way our Census Bureau classifies us as people. And this little milestone on the horizon in about 20 years is in many ways a cloud, I think, sort of hovering over American politics and the understanding of that big question, who are we? And I wanted to better understand how countries deal with these milestones. And up until now, most people think of what we're about to approach in the United States as unique in the world. And that this is something that has never happened, where immigrant origin peoples come to overtake the population size of the native or original group. to the extent that white people in the United States are native original. And what I found actually in paging through history books is that we're actually not unique. It's rare, don't get me wrong, it's rare, and we're definitely the biggest country to ever experience anything like this, but it's not unique. And so I studied 6 other societies where this had taken place before. And if you're curious, and I'm happy to go into this in greater detail later, but those societies are Singapore, Mauritius, Bahrain, Trinidad and Tobago, the Hawaiian Kingdom, which was its own country before it was forcibly annexed by the United States, and also more cheekily, New York. And of course, you're saying, wait a second, New York's not its own country, unlike the other places. And you're right, but if you talk to a New Yorker, you could be forgiven for being mistaken. But New York, like so many US states, actually used to have sovereign control over immigration. They admitted people and they could deport people until 1882, when all of US immigration policy became federalized. And what I took away from these 6 case studies, what I took away from looking at the history of how other societies have coped with the majority minority milestone, the big finding that I took away is that so much of, I think, our politics in the United States today hinges on the eradication of prejudice. And there is no doubt that prejudice is vexing, and it's a scourge on American society and our history for so long. But what's remarkable is that even the societies that I studied that transitioned the best, that adapted more successfully, prejudice, nativism, xenophobia, it all endured. What that tells us, I think, is that as we look at our demographic future, we cannot wait around for the eradication of prejudice. We cannot wait for new political institutions. We cannot wait for a more positive media environment. In many ways, that prejudice, that turf, those institutions, that is the turf upon which change and progress must take place. It is a transition, it is a milestone that is inherently managed. It is governed. And that means that strategy, creativity, policy, action is what's critical. You may be wondering where can these actions take place? How does an identity of a country become redefined? How does it expand to include those who are diverse, those who are newcomers? There are 5 main pivot areas that you should think about and watch out for as you go on. And my book identifies these over the course of these other countries' histories. The first is the politics of ideology. That is the critical question of who are we? Do we create an inclusive understanding of who we are or an exclusive understanding? The second is in the politics of commerce. The marketplace can be wonderfully interdependent. You rely on different people for different things, goods and services. But it can also be racialized. Poverty can be racialized. We can have a segmented labor market where some people feel ineligible. The third is in the politics of culture. The politics of culture can be hybridized. It's a place of fusion, art, literature, cuisine, film, sports, but it can also be divisive. These can also be the divisive politics of tradition. Fourth are the politics of the socialization of youth. That is where education comes in, right? Education is often integrative. Its curriculums can identify the contributions of diverse peoples, but they can also be the source of disputes over how we instruct our youth. And then finally, fifth is the politics of threat. Do we identify the greatest threat facing our country as or internal? Do we think that the greatest threat to our country is coming from within our own citizens, from other parties or other racial or religious groups? Watch those 5 spaces, and we will know whether the country is pivoting towards a politics of inclusion or exclusion as we focus and as we get closer to this majority minority milestone.
Thank you for that insight, Justin. Joe, let's turn to you now. Thank you for sharing your story on just the realities of refuge and what most families have to go through on their journey. And I hope everyone is really, really inspired by his story. As an honorary delegate with the Refugee Congress, you have been advocating for the Business for Refugee Pledge across Pennsylvania. Before having you speak to this pledge, I just wanted to share some important numbers for everyone in the audience today. The United States is home to more than 3.1 million refugees. 13% of refugees in the US were entrepreneurs in 2015, with businesses that granted 4.6 billion that year. And more than 70% of refugees in the US serve as essential workers as the country continues to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The pledge offers businesses an opportunity to demonstrate the support for refugees at a critical time. Can you tell us more about the pledge and why is it so important?
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much, Abdi. Well, as you all know, I think Abdi roughly provided some important statistics about refugees and the importance of the resettlement program in the United States. Immigration and the resettlement program have been very vital. The reason why we decided to bring in businesses for Pledge for Refugees actually was a result of the previous administration policy towards refugees. When we saw the admission cap plummeting to a historically low. So traditionally, our religious leaders and advocacy institutions were at the forefront of advocating for resettlement and immigration. But little did we consider the involvement of businesses to also be engaged. So two things that actually prompted that. One was to come out with a concerted effort and united voice from Main Street to Wall Street to our elected officials that are refugees and immigrants are welcome in this country, and to also re-educate the population about the benefits, both the economic and the social benefits of having refugees in the country. All right. That was the primary reason. And the other reason was to get some commitment from businesses that have not interacted with refugees, how to hire refugees, and some of the benefit that they bring to their very companies. And this is what we did. And we got more than 426 small businesses as well as a bigger corporation to sign up for that endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing so much, sir. Now, Rachel, what can you tell us about the intersection between these points we've been hearing from Joe and Justin on demographic change, building belonging, and how this connects to the work that you're leading at Welcoming America? If you'd like to speak on that.
Yeah, so much to say here to tie it all together, but let me first just give a big shout out to Joe's organization, Refugee Congress, that he's a part of, who's doing just really amazing work to make sure that the policies that we develop around refugees are also informed by and led by refugees. Which brings me to, I think, a key principle that I've always appreciated about the work here in Pittsburgh, which is it really started with this effort to talk to 3,000 community leaders about what a welcoming community meant for this community. And when I think about the 5 dimensions that you talked about, Justin, which I wish I had known about, 10 years ago when we were starting our work at Welcoming America, that sense of agency in this moment that we're going through this incredible change, to step back and look across all these dimensions and say, how do we, in this moment of transition, really come back to our values? How do we make sure that everyone is part of that? When we talk about this idea of belonging, it's both a sense of belonging. I feel part of this community, but also I'm able to shape the decisions that are happening in that. And I think, whether you are a newcomer to a community or have been in a community for a long time, I think a lot of people experience that sense of being detached from, not invited to a lot of the decisions that are being made around them. And what can be very dangerous is when the offer to belong taps into that resentment and creates a very authoritarian invitation to seize that power. And so what I think we're trying to create here is the opposite of that. How can we reclaim our power and our agency to determine what our communities look like that transcends prejudice and really enables each of us to feel a sense of ownership over our communities. And so in our work at Welcoming America, sort of coming back to that fundamental principle, and just trying to identify some of the practical things that communities can do across identity, across culture, working with youth, and really honed from this decade of experience coming out of places like Pittsburgh and many other communities around the country who have successfully been going through this transition and finding ways to do really three things: connect neighbors to one another across lines of difference, to reduce the barriers to being engaged civically, socially, and economically. So here in Pittsburgh City, the city of Pittsburgh is looking at its own role in making sure that immigration status or language or race aren't barriers to accessing city services, but really every institution in the community can think about what is preventing people from accessing and being part of and feeling a sense of ownership in those institutions. And then thinking about this culture and narrative piece. How are we unequivocally sending the message in this place that all of us are part of this place? And so, there's lots more to talk about, but maybe I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Justin, I want to turn to you, and we have copies of Justin's book, Majority Minority for Sale, at the registration table. Going through your book, you speak to the many challenges and division that fuels fear when the majority realizes that it will become a minority group. Yet you also speak to having hope and some solutions, as Rachel has touched on some. Obviously, a business becoming a part of the efforts that Joe is leading as well are important steps. But can you say more about what makes you specifically hopeful in this time of shift?
Yeah, I get accused of being an optimist quite frequently. It's a terrible slur. Here's why I'm optimistic. And it's not for the best reasons, but it's nevertheless optimism. So we accept hope where we get it, I think. I'm optimistic because in confronting this generational challenge, this historic social challenge before us, I'm optimistic because we haven't even tried yet. We haven't even tried. There is no House subcommittee on Capitol Hill responsible for social cohesion. There is no Office of National Unity at the White House. There is no special assistant to the president for social cohesion and demographic change. It just doesn't exist. If we think about 30, 40 years ago, climate change was something that was on the horizon for our country and our world. And there are lots of people who were sort of ringing alarm bells about that. And we called them tree huggers back then. And those climate change alarmists put into motion a number of actions. They said there's something on the horizon, and what government, civil society, and businesses did was plan for it. And we haven't done enough on climate change, Lord knows, but we still have actions. We still have committees. We still have infrastructure, and we have sustainability criteria. We ask, do you really need to print this piece of paper? Right? We have recycling bins. We have lots of actions we are taking now to try to mitigate the worst excesses of climate change. We need to take that approach to this problem that is a few decades down the road. But we're experiencing, like climate change, we're experiencing the rumblings already in the division of our society, in the polarization of our society, in the racialization of our politics and economy. And how can we do that? Just as sustainability became a criteria, right, is what the action you're about to take going to create environmental risk or reduce it? We can ask the same questions of ourselves in civil society, business, in politics, in government, the same way. Is the action that we are about to take going to reinforce those thick social boundaries between us, or is it going to dissolve them and transcend them? Is the action that we're about to take going to bring people together across social boundaries and have them interact, or is it going to divide them and segregate? Is the action we are about to take going to instill trust in the institution that we are responsible for, or is it going to diminish that trust? If we can ask ourselves those questions, just as climate activists asked those questions, similar analogous questions 30, 40 years ago, and threaded those through our society, we are going to be in a better place. But I'm optimistic because we have not begun this journey yet. But I believe in the ingenuity of this society, and I believe in our power to actually overcome and surmount the challenges in front of us.
Thank you for that. And I'm hearing, right, the call to action around this collective effort, right? So what Welcoming America is leading on the ground, getting community organizers, nonprofits, local governments, what Refugee Congress is also adding on to that in terms of businesses. I mean, I know the multiple prongs of approach here that need to be taken, including the federal government, what you're speaking to, right? The government, the role that the government can play and how that goes from bottom up and top down as well. With that, Joe, can you speak a bit to what you want the audience to know in terms of what belonging means to you or to the refugees you work with?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. Well, as refugees and folks that I have been working with from Pittsburgh to Erie, Lancaster, and Allentown, and throughout the country, belonging means they've been part of a major mainstream of the society, because most of the refugees feel that they are in a new home, they're in a new society, they feel marginalized. Policies are promulgated without their consultation, and there are a lot of things that go around them. They don't be part of that consultation, and they just feel left out. Therefore, belonging in that sense means that, well, there is no cultural barrier. People can relate to them, and they don't see them as potential threat to their society. So they're just like a one community and one people, all right? They can get paid for their skills, and they can contribute as well to their community by opening businesses. As you might have heard, 70% of the former refugees, many of them came as entrepreneurs. So they can put those skills into practice. By virtue of that, they feel that they belong to a major or mainstream society. This is what I'm hearing from them, and allowing them also to take part in political processes and to be civically engaged.
Thank you for that. Just a reminder, if you have questions, please put your hand up with a note card and we'll gather those. Joe is walking around right now. Abdi.
And just one last question for everyone before we turn to the questions from the audience. There are a lot of definitions, kind of for the American dream. Merriam-Webster defines it as a happy way of living that is thought out by many Americans as something that could be achieved by anyone in the US, especially by working hard and becoming successful. One thing is how something is defined, and another is how it is truly lived and experienced by all people. In a couple of sentences, what's your definition of the American dream? And we could start off with you, Joe.
Great. Before I came to the States, I used to hear from folks that used to go to the refugee camp, they would talk about, American dream. Okay, well, I didn't know exactly what did that mean. But in the refugee camp, we all thought about how can we be resettled to the United States. So to me, I thought my American dream was to get me out of the refugee camp into the United States. So that was my American dream. But when I got in the US, the American dream became a true reality. That is, you set your goal, you work hard as any American, and you achieve that goal. My first American dream, 2 years after I've arrived, was to get me a home. I became a homeowner 2 years after my resettlement, and enrolled in college and got my degrees and started helping back my community. So that became my American dream, giving back to the community that opened their arms for me and welcome me with a whole house. Okay, so that was part of my American dream. So American dream to me is that achieving what I have said and giving back to the community that welcome me to rebuild my life. Thank you.
Rachel?
I see my new friend Kathleen from the mayor's office here. And one of the things that we were talking about when we were meeting yesterday was this American dream question. And in the United States, the American dream often is so connected with this idea of what we can achieve individually. And in some ways, that's a really powerful thing about the American ethos, you know, that sort of bootstraps narrative. We can do it on our own. We have the power and agency to do it on our own. But I think the tension around that is that we can't do everything on our own, that we need community. And I think in this era where we're wrestling with these big questions about how we coexist and sustain ourselves in a planet that's in crisis, how we live in community with one another across our differences, I think we need to examine that. And I actually think this is where, you know, this wealth of experience and traditions from our own Native heritage here in the United States and also from our immigrant communities can maybe bring us to a different understanding of how we experience that American dream as a dream we dream together. That's not just about individual wealth, but collective prosperity.
I'm going to be brief. The American dream is this unexplainable, intangible sense of possibility. And I think it's felt when freedom meets opportunity.
Thank you all. Hear, hear. We have some questions from our audience. First one, what is your best advice to high school students who want to get involved and learn more about immigration and refugee policies? Who'd ever like to take this? Rachel, maybe you want to jump in first.
Well, I have a challenge, actually. If lots of resources out there to learn about policy, and just, you know, want to encourage you to go to sources that are not rooted in this great replacement narrative. Welcoming America hosts an event every year called Welcoming Week, which is really a challenge that anyone can take up to express this value in your community. And I think the creativity that we have seen from young people around what those events can look like has been just amazing. So I would love to see more young people being hosts of Welcoming Week, defining what welcoming looks like in your own schools and your own communities. And if we can be a resource to you in doing that, Welcoming America is here for that.
Okay, that's great. For Refugee Congress, one thing that I have been doing with you know, young people, we were piloting this Refugee Youth Ambassadors program in these schools. I started with Temple University, my alma mater. I going to various classes and do a presentation. And we also do a Zoom meeting so that young people can ask questions about refugees and stuff like that. And sometimes we'll also provide some sort of internship, you know, virtual internship to kind of volunteer and, you know, do some advocacy work for us in your state. So if you're interested on that, then you can always visit our website, refugeecongress.org, you know, to learn more.
My advice to you is to get in your car, drive 20 miles in any direction, and go meet people who are different from you. Engage in deep conversations where you make the time to listen to them. Find places of unity, find things you have in common, note things that are different, and note how you can surmount those differences because what you have in common is so much stronger. Identify the sources of common humanity. Talk about your stories, tell stories, what Hawaiians call talk story. And that is truly the best thing you can do, because from those conversations, you will identify a sense of direction. You have enough of those conversations and you will see your world in a different way, because it will no longer be mediated by the internet, by news sources, by other people's stories. You will have your own story to tell.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, beautiful. We have time for one more question. This one is on identity. Identity is consistently discussed when talking about belonging. How do you think prejudice influences the construction of people's identities, specifically refugees and immigrants?
So the majority minority milestone that I referred to earlier requires one thing that is terribly vexing in American history, and that is a white, non-white binary, which creates the sense that in all of our diversity, it can all be simplified down to just that little dichotomy. Think about this. Our country has hundreds of nationalities and ethnic groups, hundreds of languages spoken, hundreds of religious groups and sects. And when you compile them on top of each other, they intersect in basically infinite ways. And what people are trying to get us to believe is that we can simplify all of that complexity, all of that remarkable color and diversity into whether someone constitutes whiteness or non-whiteness. It is bull. We cannot allow the idea that race is anything other than a construction. We cannot allow the idea that even ethnicity is anything other than a construction. These are man-made boundaries that were created to divide for political purposes. We do not need them anymore. Can I tell a very quick story about American history? We have actually had a majority minority milestone before we just swept it under the rug. In the 19th century, when a lot of Americans' families came from Europe, there were Irish, Italians, Germans, Jews, Slavs, Greeks, Lebanese, all coming from abroad. They were not white. They were called white ethnics. They were discriminated against, they were excluded, they were reviled. And around the turn of the 20th century, it was becoming very clear to America's Anglo-Protestant elites that their understanding of whiteness was not going to last very long. What happened was a broadening of whiteness to include those white ethnic groups that is often heralded as a triumph of American integration. The problem was we brought in whiteness, but we didn't broaden America. Because in broadening whiteness, in inviting those white ethnic groups into the fraternity of whiteness, we actually continued, we perpetuated the subjugation of people who were deemed not white enough. That means African Americans, that means Asian Americans, or at the time who were called Asiatics, and also eventually Latinos. And so what we did is we moved that white, non-white division, that dichotomy, but we didn't actually broaden what it means to be an American. And so the challenge I think that we are confronting from a boundary-based perspective is how do we create a civic understanding of who we are, not one that is ethno-religious, that acknowledges those heritages, but are not defined by them.
Excellent. Any quick final reactions to that question?
Yeah, I just want to add quickly one thing that is also important to that was the data for education as well. My experience in the Bucks County area, I visited a school, an elementary school during they were talking about refugee and immigration. So one of the teachers invited me, and I just asked one of the little kids, "What do you know about refugees?" And someone put their hand up and said, my parents were telling me about refugees, that these are people that come in the country and their taxes go to them and they live on handout and they spend all their money on them. I said, oh, that's very interesting. Okay, so probably I going to schools and educating these young people so that they can have that kind of discussion at the dinner table. That is very essential. That may actually shift the narrative about immigration and also refugee admission. So that's what I wanted to add to that. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I think maybe I'll only add that we are so tied up in our own identities as people that are like personally transcending prejudice. Nobody wants to believe about themselves that they are biased, and yet we all are. And so I think as we can resist the temptation to be perfect humans born without bias, that will also enable us to have these harder conversations that move us through racial healing and to have the harder conversations that require us to go out and also listen.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panel. We are at time. Justin, Rachel, Joe, my co-moderator, Abdi, thank you so much. You'll be hearing more from Justin if you're headed up to 548, if you're attending the summit. He'll be on the panel there. You'll be hearing more from Rachel and this question around belonging if you're sticking with the Institute, and you'll be staying down here. Not sure whether to go to the summit or the Institute. Institute is for students only. So if you're in high school, you go to the Institute. Adults come up to 548. We have a quick break and we will see you at 10:45. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you again.